Every single year, many will step into the national parks believing they're safe when they might turn into one of the 1,600 that has gone missing. In tonight's episode, we're going to be looking at real missing persons cases that have all disappeared and vanished under strange circumstances. A young and upcoming outdoorsman, Drake Kramer was a 21-year-old university student studying geology. He had a profound love for nature and exploring the outdoors, which being one of the primary reasons he really wanted to pursue geology. Drake Kramer could be described as a social butterfly. He was very kind, very friendly, and would put a smile on anybody's face that he came into contact with. This being one of the primary reasons why his disappearance is so strange. His decision alone to go and visit the Grand Canyon wasn't a surprise to any of his friends or family, but his decision to go and visit alone was a little bit unexpected. After first arriving in California and then the Grand Canyon, Drake arrived at and stayed at the Bright Angel Lodge on February 1st, 2015. Right before this, his parents had just seen him, and they reported that he was in good spirits, he was happy, he was in a great mood. But after his parents saw him on the 29th of January, he had told them about his solo trip, and they had asked him when he sent them a text message explaining that he had to set his soul free and he needed to do this. Some speculate that he had been dealing with closeted depression and this was his way out to commit suicide. But that's just a theory. Once he arrived at the lodge, he left his car in the parking lot completely intact, did not take anything out. He just left it as is, and decided to go and travel along the south rim of the Grand Canyon, which is a gargantuan piece of land. His mom and dad both thought the text message was a little out of place, but just assumed that Drake needed to do some soul searching for the time being. The south rim is where he was last seen. It is uncertain of what happened to him to this very day. While there was a search party called, they found no trace of his clothing, no trace of him, or any evidence that he could possibly leave behind. Kramer's body, or any clues leading to his death or disappearance or his whereabouts have not been found yet. His official date of disappearance is January 31st, 2015. I find for me that the most disturbing aspect of this particular case is that there are just no remains, period. That they knew where he was going, and although the South Rim is a massive area of terrain and it can vary a lot, that he simply just vanished. What do you think about it? Floyd Roberts, yet another individual who had just simply gone missing without a trace. His history dates back to 1992 when he had went to the Grand Canyon for the first time with a close friend. Floyd, who would quickly develop a deep love for hiking in the outdoors, would continue to go back with his new hiking companion and friend, Ned Bryant. They would go back there hiking several times throughout the years pass, and in June of 2016, they would both go, and Bryant bringing his daughter with him. These were not inexperienced hikers by any stretch of the means. They had a good feel of common sense in the outdoors, they had the right equipment, they knew where they were going. If you were to look at all their hiking credentials on paper, everything checks off, which means that there was no room for rookie errors to be made, like in many cases you would expect. And on June 17th, when they were all hiking together in a group of 3, they came to a hill where the Bryants decided to hike over it and Roberts around it. The problem here is that Roberts did not meet them on the other side. The Bryants, confused by this, thought something had happened to him. They began to worry about him and actually go and see if he was on the trail, but it's as if he had simply vanished like the rest and was nowhere to be found. So, thinking quickly, they head back to camp and place a brightly colored sleeping bag on the tree to alert him, kind of as a color flag to get his attention. And unfortunately, Robert never made it back to camp. And so it was at that point the Bryants had no other option but to report him missing. A massive search party persisted in finding Roberts for 6 days until the search party power was reduced due to the heat of Kelly Tanks, which is a very remote section of the park. Now that it's been 6 years, there has still been no trace of Floyd Roberts anywhere. And this is a man who was very intelligent. He had the resources with him and around him, he had the smarts, he was very familiar with the area and the terrain, and yet he still goes missing. A man who had taught programming, game design, and even worked for NASA at some point, there's no reason that he would just make a stupid mistake and casually walk off or make a simple beginner's error that would cause him to die. So if search parties were not able to find any evidence of him, what happened to him? Michael Ficery, a man who should have never vanished in the first place. This is the kind of guy that you would expect who could conquer just about any trail. He was an off-the-grid kind of guy, very knowledgeable of the outdoors, claims that he had the memory of an elephant, and had a deep love for surfing, cycling, and especially hiking and exploring. But his last day that he would ever be seen was June 15th, 2005, when he went off to explore into Yosemite National Park. He was so confident in his skills that he went off backpacking all by himself in one of the less known areas of Yosemite National Park, known as the Hetch Hetchy Reservoir. He was to head there first and ultimately head to Lake Vernon afterwards. And for whatever reason, at some point during his hike, he decided to change plans and instead take the Pacific Crest Trail towards Tiltil Mountain. There are many parts of Yosemite that the terrain can prove to be dangerous, but if you're somebody like Michael, who is very mindful and very cautious of the terrain, he should have had no problems. And speaking of which, injury was no stranger to Michael, considering he had already broken his ankle while hiking in Yellowstone and actually had to crawl his way out of the wilderness to get help. So you think a man like this, there's no reason he should disappear, right? But it was when he did not return home that his family feared the worst. Ficery's search party was so massive that even Marines had gotten involved, and unlike many others, they actually found something of his bag, completely abandoned and intact, containing his food, his water, a map, his camera, and a man like Michael would never just abandon his bag, which led people to believe that something happened to him. Unfortunately, after the search had continued, there was no traces of Michael Ficery ever found. Is it possible that he just bit off more than he could chew and was simply unprepared for this trek? Or did something really happen to him? Potentially natural, like a bear, or maybe he fell and got injured and died? Or perhaps the supernatural intervened? I'll leave that up to you. Morgan Heimer, an employee of Tour West, which is a rafting company on the Colorado River, disappeared on June 2nd, 2015. Only 22 years of age, he was already a very experienced outdoorsman, an amazing hiker, and an amazing swimmer. On an 8-day excursion, Morgan was the last in line in bringing the raptors back from a swim. Even the lead tour guide was perplexed and flabbergasted at his disappearance because he had simply walked away from the cliff they were at to go talk to a member when he turned around and Morgan was just simply gone. There is nowhere in the visible vicinity that he could have just vanished without ever being seen or heard, so for him to just simply disappear as if he was vapor does not make any sense. This is a man who valued safety very much. He was very experienced, he was also wearing his life jacket, and also very familiar with the terrain. This is not somebody who would just recklessly disappear or jump down a cliff or go run off in the woods for whatever reason. But as strange as his disappearance was, the lead tour guide just figured he disappeared and went off to go have a break somewhere. But it wasn't until he did not return to camp for dinner that authorities were called in. This since launched a 6-day search for Morgan, but like the others, no trace of him was ever found. Chiricahua National Monument, a beautiful park located in the state of Arizona, filled with canyons, wildlands, and very dangerous terrain. You would think that this would almost make the perfect place for somebody to vanish. Well, yes and no. The missing person here goes by the name of Paul Fugate and was a park ranger at this park. Like many others, extremely experienced in the outdoors, had been doing this job for a long time, and was very outdoor savvy. After finishing his ranger shift at 2 p.m., he told coworkers he was going to go on a hike, and if he was not back by 4:30 p.m., that they could close off his duties. So off he goes down the trail, still in uniform by the way, and by his coworkers and colleagues, they could visibly see him going down the trailhead. And his colleagues were the last people he had ever spoken to, because his disappearance was realized almost immediately when he did not return to do his closing duties and would never leave a part-time seasonal employee to finish his duties for him. Paul, who was so well versed in the outdoors, would have made an amazing expert in search and rescue, but the sheriff's department and the national park had to search without him. After several failed searches for Paul and not finding a trace, they had actually been willing to offer large sums of money to anybody who could offer any information to his potential whereabouts. This all took place back in 1980, where he was only 41 at the time of his disappearance. And the way the national park handled his case is absolutely disgusting. Even though he was listed and written down as missing, they believed that he just walked off the job permanently and was considered terminated. And because of this left Paul's wife unable to collect any pension or any survivor benefits that she could have reaped. They even demanded that she repay the $6,000+ that they had gifted to her during the time of his disappearance. However, it wouldn't be until 5 years later, once the case was reviewed, that his widow would rightfully get what she was owed and be able to receive his benefits, because for whatever reason, it took them 5 years for the park at the time to finally accept that he was no longer among the living. While Paul's disappearance and the circumstances surrounding it is disturbing, the way in which the national park handled business with his widow is typical bureaucracy. George Penca, another man who vanished under very mysterious circumstances, and a case that simply proves there's not always strength in numbers. So, in June of 2011, George, along with 80 other of his congregation members, all went to Yosemite National Park. While he did have the safety of his congregation around him, even though George was not the best of hikers or all that experienced in the outdoors, George, at one point or another during this day, had gotten separated from his congregation, stating somewhere along the ways that he did not feel well and was going to go back down to camp. But the main problem is that this area, also known as the Upper Yosemite Falls, is a very well-traveled area. A lot of foot traffic coming to and from, and so somebody surely would have seen him either coming up or coming down, and the last time anybody ever recalls seeing George was on June 17th, 2011 at about 2:40 in the afternoon, when he had somehow gotten lost being separated in his group. The rest of his group just assumed that George went back to camp and he wasn't feeling well, and so when they would return to camp later on, they would know that George was not anywhere around, nor had anybody seen where he was at, so he wasn't officially reported missing until around after 9 p.m. that same night. The area in which they were hiking is known as the Upper Yosemite Falls, which is a very strenuous, very difficult hike as rated by the park itself. This trail is also heavily traveled with a lot of foot traffic going back and forth between, and yet nobody happened to see George walking along down the trail with his bag of food and water with him. What's even more strange is that not only did he disappear under very mysterious circumstances, considering it was perfect weather, clear, blue skies, sunny day, he was around a lot of people, he was with his church congregation, so he had people around him, he knew where he was going, and yet it's like he somehow managed to just vanish out of nowhere. And yet what's even more bizarre is there was never one single trace of his bag, his food, his water, him, his clothing, any blood, any DNA evidence that would help investigators pinpoint where he was last when he disappeared. It's simply as if he had just vanished out of Yosemite Park. Pauline Melton's disappearance is also a very strange one in today's video. Her full name, Thelma Pauline Melton, or otherwise known as Polly, while out of shape and a very heavy smoker, had a deep love and passion for the outdoors. She often spent a lot of her summers in the mountains, hiked as often as she could, and just thoroughly loved the Smoky Mountains in her hometown of North Carolina. So, it was this day in September of 1981 when Melton took a trail that was marked as easy. During this hike, she was also hiking along with two other friends who both gave their own verbal witness testimony and said that she was hiking faster than them and actually sped off in front of them, going over a large knoll where she had completely vanished without a trace at all or any signs of her ever going anywhere other than the trail. Not hearing any sounds or noises that would indicate Polly to be in any sort of distress or injury, they just figured she had just sped off ahead of them and is now back at the camp. What's strange is that she did not have any personal belongings on her, like her medication which she was taking for high blood pressure and nausea at the time, nor did she have her purse or any extra clothing. But there is some strange circumstances not only surrounding her disappearance, but what happened after. About a year later, a check in her name had cleared and been cashed in Alabama. The authorities are unsure of whether it was her signature or not. A very popular and widely accepted theory is that Polly ran off ahead of them purposefully to go and meet her new lover in the woods, to vanish without a trace, leaving behind her identity, leaving behind any part of her old life that she had, to go and start off a new life with her new man. It was at this time that her third and last husband had fallen very ill, and her pastor even suspected her of having an affair. Her mother also died, so when you put these things in correlation to the events that take place, it does kind of make sense, and I could see why it's a widely accepted theory. Another very interesting clue is that she often, and by often almost daily, volunteered at one of the senior homes, and for the very first time in 4 years, the day right before her disappearance, she had asked to use the phone. So it kind of makes you wonder if there was really something going on. However, to this day, her missing case profile is completely open and nobody has a single trace of Polly or where her current whereabouts are. Either the theory that is speculated about her is true and she did indeed go off and start a new life, hence cashing a check in her name, and the mysterious circumstances surrounding her disappearance the day before, like making a phone call, and we don't know who it was to. But on the other side of the coin, there have been so many mysterious vanishings in national parks that hers falls right into that, so it would make sense. Either way you look at it, Polly's disappearance and where she is now is shrouded in mystery, and still sits as an open case to this very day. Stacy Ann Arras, a 14-year-old girl that went missing inside Yosemite National Park. Her and her family had gone on a guided tour. It was her father, 6 others, her, all riding mules. The area that they were going through was thick with campsites, each within about a half mile to a mile apart from each other. Her and her family was staying in cabins at the Sunrise High Sierra Camp. After arriving at the cabins and getting everything settled in and ready to go explore Yosemite, she had asked her father if he would go and accompany her while she went down to the lake and took pictures. He insisted on resting because he was already pretty tired from the trip in, since their cabins were the very last in line. So, instead, a more elderly man in his 70s decided to accompany her while she went down to the lake. A man by the name of Gerald Stewart, who was already in the tour group with them. On the way down to the lake, Stewart decided to sit on a rock and rest as he could see Stacy going down to the lake. And where they were going, the trail in which they were following down to the lake, was visible by the entire campsite up at the cabin. Shortly thereafter, he began asking campers coming up the way Stacy had came if they had seen her. He was very confused and also worried, and campers had no idea who or what he was talking about. Stacy had completely vanished. This is when a massive search party ensued the following day, with 3 helicopters, dogs, search crews, and they did everything they could, scouring all around the lake and the cabins to try and find her. The only evidence or trace of her ever even existing was them finding her camera lens with the camera cap on it. There was not even so much as a drop of blood or a singular piece of clothing that would indicate who or what took her. What's very strange about this one is she was only 14, and she's not just going to go off and vanish off the side of a mountain. I mean, this search party had at least 100 people, plus helicopters, plus dogs, in the vicinity of the massive area they were in. If she had somehow managed to get injured or hurt herself, surely she would have been found, and had she been attacked or killed by a bear or something else, I think there would have been evidence or some sort. Maybe not. She is simply and unfortunately another one of the many vanishing cases in the national park system. Teresa Gibson's disappearance focuses all around the Great Smoky National Park. Teresa, at the time of her disappearance, was only a 16-year-old high school student, and so on October 8th, 1976, her and her classmates and her teacher would go and explore this national park. Their destination is Clingman's Dome, which has a beautiful 45-foot observation tower which gives you a gorgeous view of the surroundings. Teresa was last seen to be enjoying herself, in very good spirits and very talkative, and a very bright mood. And this is a classic case of somebody being there one minute and the next they're not. Teresa, who was walking along the trail with 2 other girls, decided to sit down and rest. Whereas Teresa just said, you know what, I'm going to keep on going ahead, I don't need to rest, I'll see you guys and catch up with the group. And the trail in which they were going down was used very heavily, so you had groups of people going back and forth between, so she wasn't alone. And the whole entire time she's going up this trail, she's passing people, people are coming past her, it's very high traffic. Teresa, who had also come with a very large group of at least 40 students plus a teacher, was the only one this day to disappear. And the trail that they were on was not exactly an easy one, because there's some very major steep drop-offs on one side. There is speculation that she somehow fell off one of the side of the cliffs, but somebody around her would have had to see or hear her because it was such a very busy trail that day, and that just seems very unlikely to happen. Also, we have to look at the possibility of a human abduction, because if that is the case, then they would have had to do so swiftly and so secretively that nobody around them could have saw or heard what was going on, which again is possible, but not likely. After she had been reported missing that very evening, the search party had a very difficult time trying to find her, battling constant rain and fog. Several volunteers and even dogs joined in on the search party to help and locate Teresa. What's very interesting about this case is that her scent was actually found about 1.5 miles past where the dome was, which was the original group's destination point, and it makes no sense why she would even travel past there, because she couldn't have gotten lost. She's on a marked trail, and she would have no reason as an individual and by herself to venture that far past the dome, and without telling anybody, it just did not add up. And at that point, after tracing her scent 1.5 miles past that dome, her scent just cut off completely. Investigators and search parties were not able to find any trace of her after that. No blood, no clothing, no signs of her ever even being in the area. Like the others, it's as if she had simply just vanished without a trace. And even all these years later, she still has never been found. If you guys enjoyed today's episode, make sure you like this video, comment on it, and subscribe for more great videos. But more importantly, you guys, this kind of video is very sensitive, so I want all of us out there to give respect and our condolences to the families of those who've been lost in today's stories. And if you're passionate about helping out the missing 411 cases, you can go ahead and visit David Paulides' website down below in the description. We want to spread as much awareness as possible that these things are going on in these national parks and something is going on. Whether it be a secret, whether it be a conspiracy, people have the right to know.